Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Eating at a Meeting Live. I am on the fly today, did not make any announcements that I was going to be here, but it's Wednesday and it's just after 12 o'clock. So I wanted to reflect on yesterday, on 4th of July, and actually there was quite a other independence holidays during the month of July, and I wanted to talk about um, freedom and independence. I'm going to copy this in here real quick. And so put it up here. Um, the that freedom and independence, the secret to successful event, food and beverage. And what does that mean? And if you've been following me long enough, for the month of July, I really do focus on what it means for freedom and independence when you're catering food and beverage functions, when you're serving food and beverage at your house. What does that mean to individuals across the board? And as you know, I produced 3 events last week, or was part of producing 3 events. One I was in charge of food and beverage, one I was in charge of exhibits, and one I produced from beginning to end. Um, and there was a lot of different thought processes around what that looked like in every instance. And when we talk about freedom and independence, and then we combine what eating at a meeting is about safety, sustainability, and inclusion. What does that mean? And I'm going to start with what it means for safety aspects of it, and then I'm going to tie into some stories from the 3 different events I produced, just because they're top of mind. But safety is about understanding, providing that safe experience, and that safe experience from the plate's perspective. What are you serving on the plate, as well as the safety aspect of getting to that plate? And I know if you've listened to me previously, heard me speak, I'm like, it's not just what's on the plate, it's how you get to the plate, and can someone get to the plate. But it's all the safety aspects of it, from the farm all the way to that plate as well. So what kind of questions are you, as a meeting host, paying attention to? How the food and beverage is served, how the food and beverage is harvested and produced in the kitchen, what safety practices are going into place with that. And when you think about that freedom and independence, it really does go back all the way to the farmer. Are we providing freedom and independence for that farmer to grow that food for us, right? It might seem a long stretch for that, but it really is that. And are we giving them the freedom to grow the food and beverage that they want to grow, whether it's pesticide-free, organic, it's vegan, it's whatever, it's regenerative agriculture, different animals that are growing that way? What kind of safety practices are we doing that allow for freedom and independence in growing that fruit and beverage? But when you're thinking about serving someone on the front end or on the back end of that, right? What does that mean? So it was 2 weeks ago, I had a group of 80-year-old Marines for my event. And, how do we make sure that they can access those plates and get to those spaces? We required using buses to get there. And so did the buses have the ability to welcome guests who had limited mobility in stepping up into a bus, or where to put their wheelchairs or their scooters or their walkers? We had 3 people with walkers, and our bus drivers were very good in helping us collapse those walkers, put them underneath the bus, and then get them for them and help them off the bus. But that's that safety aspect of getting to the plate. And then also, what's the method of, once they're off that bus, what's the pathway to get to that space, right? One of the women that was utilizing a walker, we had a young Marine actually gave her a wheelchair to use instead, and he pushed her through the entire event, through the catering, through the buffet, in the chow hall, where we got to eat with these young Marines. But it was really thinking through those different aspects of it, and what were the safety precautions that we needed to take for those attendees. But then it also comes down to, when you're thinking safety wise, it's labeling and ensuring that you have options for people. And how is that labeling listed? And actually, I'm speaking next week at for Visit Raleigh. I'm speaking at their Meeting Professionals Summit in Raleigh, or actually in Cary, North Carolina. And they sent me the menu in advance, and I sent questions. I'm like, they said, and they said all the food is going to be labeled. My question to them is, how is it going to be labeled? Is it going to be labeled so that it's things are noted that they are free of, so it's gluten free, or it's dairy free, or it's nut free? Or is it going to say contains gluten, contains dairy? How is it going to be labeled? And they wanted to put out a know before you go, and they wanted to put the menu out. And so my question to them was, are you also going to label that menu for attendees in that know before you go? I love putting that menu idea out there, because it's giving individuals the freedom and independence to know what they can and cannot eat before they actually get to the event. And then actually asking my client those questions up front, it helps maybe have them rethink what kind of freedom and independence they're giving to their attendees with the menu that they chose, or the menu that's being offered. So thinking really through those things. And then also, the level of the buffet. And in a planning call that I had, because I'm doing a keynote speech and I'm moderating a panel on the inclusion and accessibility of events. And you have to think about the buffet size or height, right? Do you have anybody utilizing wheelchairs? But it doesn't even come down to that. In our planning call, one of the women said, you need to plan ahead and go ahead and do that, and make sure that there are options for that. Not thinking, oh, well, we don't have anybody that utilizes wheelchairs, so nobody, that's handicapped comes to our event. Well, they probably don't come to your event because you don't already communicate what you are providing for attendees in that way for them to access the food and beverage that you have. So it's when you're thinking through it and you're thinking about it, it shouldn't be the afterthought. It should be a universal design. And my friend Tahira has a book of designing around universal design. And it should be the way that we plan our events across the board from beginning to end, not just doing the things that we do the same old way and thinking about the freedom and independence after the fact. We need to be thinking about and having conversations with individuals who may be attending or who have different needs, walking through our space with us. Well, how do you access this, right? Is this too long of a walk for you? Can you reach these buffets? Can you do this? Can you eat this if you have somebody with dietary restrictions, right? Thinking through all of those processes and planning for that in advance makes it a lot more accessible for everyone. And when I was taking an ADA course a couple of years ago, the main example was the fact that curb cuts. And if you think about curb cuts on a sidewalk, right? When it's got that curved thing down and you roll across it with your stroller or with your suitcase, or because you're visually impaired or utilizing a scooter or whatever, that curb cut was originally designed for individuals who utilize wheelchairs and scooters. But who did I just say uses it? It's for everyone's use. More than just one person utilizes that. So when we think about designing our events, think about how you're designing the safety aspect of that. And safety comes in with what's being served on the plate, how it's labeled, what your servers know about it. Somebody tagged me on LinkedIn the other day with a label that a caterer had put around the neck of the server. And it said, hey, I'm serving whatever it was. And it says contains walnuts. And I loved it because it was a nicely done presentation. I'll find the link and I'll put it here. Nicely done presentation. There's a couple of other allergens that I would have actually added to that list, but it was a fun way to do it. And it made it very apparent, because servers don't have the capability of carrying a tray and looking at their banquet event order to check on the allergens. It puts it right there in front of it and makes it accessible for everyone to read and understand. So I really love that safety aspect of it. Sustainability, when you're thinking about freedom and independence, it kind of goes back to that statement I said a few minutes ago about the farmer, right? What kind of freedom and independence are we giving our farmers and our food suppliers in providing food and beverage for our attendees and for our food and beverage functions? And thinking about promoting sustainable practices, right? So 3 weeks ago or a month ago, I losing track now, and I've mentioned this 2 weeks ago, I believe it was, in the podcast, whereas instead of having water and tea preset on the tables for a lunch for 700 people, I actually had water stations and tea stations set up instead. And that was providing that sustainability, that freedom for people to choose what they wanted to drink versus already delineating or delegating what they were going to eat and drink, and not being and being wasteful in that. So we want to be the stewards in the sustainability practice, and providing the freedom to embracing alternatives and allowing people to make the choices that they want in what they have. And it also comes down to, in one of those food functions, the main choice of entree was fish. And we did have some dishes on the side. We had a vegetarian dish if people didn't want to eat the fish. We did give meal cards to individuals, but we also had some people who just don't like fish and they wanted a chicken dish. So we were able to provide that chicken dish. And I will be planning that in advance a lot better the next time to solve that problem. But because we weren't doing a buffet, and so we weren't able to give people the freedom and independence of choice in a buffet and having multiple items, but it was a lot easier to serve it as a plated meal. And so thinking about that aspect of sustainability and the freedom, because we do want that freedom and independence to have a sustainable world after the fact and a sustainable event. So making those choices in our event planning process is actually giving freedom and independence for the future. And then when we talk about inclusivity, the aspect of that is really about, it really kind of goes back to that safety issue that I talked about as well. It should guide our event planning process in creating that inclusive experience for everybody. And what does that mean at the dinner table? And that means that we have options for guests, like I said, fish, chicken, or vegetarian, vegan options, making sure that we have meals for the individual who eats kosher. And how will he or she participate in that food and beverage function when maybe that person's Orthodox Jew and we need that meal brought in from another catering company versus the hotel? How do we incorporate that and make that an inclusive experience for them in that dining room as well? It's dietary restrictions, it's cultural practices, accessibility, inclusion. So I was talking in the pre-planning meeting for this event for Visit Raleigh next week. One of the other panel members mentioned about allowing people inside a room earlier for the accessibility reasons, right? And I've used this example before of a friend of mine who was denied access to a lunchroom function early, utilizing a scooter. She needed to get in because, as you know, when you open up the doors and everybody rushes in and sits down, somebody who utilizes a wheelchair or a scooter can't maneuver through the tables as easy as everyone else. We don't, and that many people rushing into a food function at one time, where are the aisles for them to get to, right? Can they get in there and around? Where is their seating? Do you have places for scooters and wheelchairs or walkers to be placed in the room so they're not a hazard for servers or other attendees in doing such? I went to the movies over the weekend to see Indiana Jones, and when I was pre-buying the ticket, I was kind of floored because the handicap seating or the accessible seating was at the very front row of the movie theater, right? The screen, in front of the screen. And I'm like, okay, so you're having the people with accessibility who have accessible needs to travel the furthest to get to their seat versus having the seats in the back of the house, right? And I remember having this conversation about event design for a convention years ago, and somebody was designing that all the seating for accessible seating was in the back of the room. Well, I think you need to have it scattered throughout the room so that it gives that person the freedom and choice to sit wherever they want to sit based on their needs. Do they want to be front and center? Maybe. Do they want to be in the middle of the room? Right. So designing seating around the room is really, really important. And that gives freedom and independence, a choice of where they want to sit versus placing them a specific place. And sometimes it happens, and you have to do that for different reasons. And I was watching the Today Show this morning, and I noticed that a young lady was there to watch what was that band? Twice, the K-pop band Twice. And their accessible viewing area was up front near the stage, right? But how do they allow that woman to get up front to do that? You know, what is their process to doing that? And they know they have a process to do that. So what is your process to allowing that freedom and independence to get into the space, to providing that inclusivity? Because when it comes down to understanding, you know, what I need, and I want to be able to make a choice without, and make a decision without being focused on, right? Or, hey, how can I help you? What can I do? You know, being an afterthought. Let me make that choice, or let me have that decision-making process ahead of time. And that really opens up that freedom and independence, because when you do frequently ask questions, or you think ahead and provide options for people in their whole planning process, you open up the doors for so many new experiences for people. And again, in this planning process conversation the other day, and this panel is going to be a great conversation next week on Friday. And if you want to register, you can. If you live in Raleigh, please come. I'll put the link in the chat. But it's just being very proactive about what you're doing. And now that brings me to a thought that I had, a question that I got from an attendee years ago at an event I was speaking at. And he's like, well, you're talking about 2/3 of the people who have a dietary need or have a physical need to get into the space. He's like, what about the other 1/3 of the people who, and I just stopped and I took a breath and I asked him, I'm like, can you eat everything on the buffet, whether it's labeled gluten-free, whether it's labeled vegan, whether it's labeled whatever? And he's like, well, yeah. And I said, then what's the problem in that making sure that we have options that those individuals can eat? And he just took a step back and he's like, didn't even think about it that way. So when we're thinking about designing it, like, anybody without a dietary restriction can eat everything that's on the buffet. I mean, of course, unless they have dislikes of things, but dislikes is very much different than having something that might potentially kill you, right? Or goes against your religious values or your personal values. So really thinking through those things. And you're not going to be able to plan for every single different scenario, right? But if you can think through how you can plan for them, you're going to create a more inclusive environment, and you're going to provide a lot more freedom and independence. And it's, you might think that I'm coming at it from a very big, broad perspective, but I think it's something that we think about and that we need to think about as event professionals. I'm putting my newsletter together, and it will be sent out today. And if you want to sign up, go to my website, thrivemeetings.com, and talking about the same topic. But I'm going to link you back to an article that I wrote from 2020. And it is about how COVID impacted the freedom and independence on so many people not being able to put food on their table. So they were food insecure. And there's a lot more people food insecure these days as well. I'm going to find that link and I'll put it in here. So that is something else that we actually really need to think about as well, is what does, I'm trying to find it here. Here we go. It left millions of people, COVID left millions of people food insecure. So I'm going to post that link in here in the comments. And so you can go to that blog post on my website. But how can we as meeting professionals and as individuals help others who are food insecure, right? And in this blog post, I give you a variety of different organizations that you can connect with, like Feeding America, World Central Kitchen, Farm Link Project. They all provide options for the food insecure. Here in New Bern, North Carolina, there's a company called RCS. And I've helped them and plan on helping them a lot more in the coming months and feeding people in the community. And as meeting professionals, thinking through our sustainability practices, reducing our food waste, if we're not reducing it from the front end, making sure that people who are food insecure or organizations that feed individuals who are food insecure have the ability to come and rescue that food, reclaim that food and put it on someone else's plate. And at RCS, they're really, really excited to be able to get food from different restaurants, from the food bank, from the grocery stores. That's where they're reclaiming the food to then feed their constituents. And so that's another way of providing food freedom and independence with the event food and beverage function. So making sure you have that lined up before your event to incorporate that into your planning process. Because food insecurity is not going away, and we need to make sure that the excess food that we do have from our plates, or that it not from our plates, but that has been prepared and unserved, is actually getting to someone else's plate. So I have that article or blog post that I just shared with you on the link. But then the other aspect of it, and I've kind of brought some of these things up today, is in that planning process to provide freedom and independence around when you're planning event food and beverage, is that one, you need to ask your attendees. Ask your attendees if they have any dietary needs, and that includes the ability to get to the plate. What kind of assistance can we provide? Is there anything that we need to make your event experience better by providing you a different option, a personalized plate to eat, or getting to how can we help you get to that plate? We need to accept, one of the biggest things is that we as planners and as chefs and as banquet captains or banquet servers, we need to accept that not everybody eats the same way, right? And whether it's a choice, it's a medical reason, it's a religious-based reason, or it's a food allergy, which is another medical reason, people can't eat specific ways for different reasons, and it's okay. We don't have to get mad at them. We don't have to think they're weird. We need to give them the freedom and the independence to eat it the way that they need, so that they aren't harmed. We need to incorporate the needs into the overall planning processes. We need to understand what we're serving, and all of these things, doing these things helps provide freedom and independence, and the success of a food and beverage function. And I'm going to post the link to this article too, this blog post that I wrote. This is a different blog post from a different time on here as well, that you can access that and look at ways to make sure that you're providing freedom and independence in your food and beverage function. So I hope everybody had a stupendous day, whether it was Canada Day 4 days ago, it was Independence Day in the US yesterday. We've got Bastille Day coming up in a few days. Actually, what day is that? That is, I forgot the day that Bastille Day is. And then Fiestas Patrias in Peru. Those are all festivals and celebrations around freedom and independence for those countries. And so really reflecting on what that means when we're creating food and beverage functions is really, really important. And I hope that you learned something from this. And I'm going to be posting a couple of things throughout the month about this as well. So give me your thoughts. Let me know what you think about what freedom and independence means for you as a person with a different dietary need, or as a meeting planner. What does it mean to you? Chat, comment on this post. Let me know, and let's talk about it, because it really is an opportunity to grow your business, to make a new friend, to feed someone, and to just be a good person. So thank you for listening. Yesterday, the new episode of Eating and Meeting dropped on the audio only aspect of it. It was my interview with the vice president of in-flight services for Delta Airlines. So that was a great conversation with her, talking about food and beverage on the planes, what they're serving now on Delta Airlines, and what food safety means for them on those planes. And the last couple of weeks, a couple of other great episodes came up from my month of conversations with women who are making a mark in their Women's History Month. So take a listen to some of those as well. And I'm coming up on the 200th episode of this show. So let me know what you want to talk about. I'm going to bring a couple of different people who've been here in the past to talk about it, and to celebrate 200 years, 200 episodes. So I appreciate you listening, and I appreciate you taking the time to provide safe, inclusive, and sustainable food and beverage experiences for your attendees. And until next time, stay safe and eat well. Thanks.